Maybe. Hold on.
Mhm. We're live. Are we live yet? It
Not
always
on
takes.
my end.
We are live. What's up, everybody?
Awesome. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Coding for Noobs. We are here on our Saturday live stream. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, or depending upon where you are in the world, maybe afternoon or evening. But welcome. We have a special guest with us today. This is Joe. Joe, welcome. Joe is not you. You're Randall.
I'm waving to Joe. I'm waving to
Oh,
Joe.
sorry. You're gonna confuse people.
Trying to say hi. Jesus.
All right. Yeah, so we have Joe here. Joe's also a developer. He's been a developer for quite a while now, and the three of us. So today's topic is what to expect from a coding boot camp. And so I know a lot of people who have been joining the group have actually reached out to me directly about, what direction they should take. What is the next step? A lot of them are starting with really the basics of web development, which is HTML and CSS. Some people are also getting into JavaScript a little bit. So I've gotten a lot of questions about, should I take a boot camp? Should I go to a university? Should I self-teach? So I'm seeing a lot of faces here. So maybe you want to start, Randall. Like, what's your take? What do you think is the best
it kind
course
of depends
of
what you're looking for. It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking to blow $200,000 and then work at Starbucks, university is the way to go.
Awesome. All right, that's our live stream, everybody.
There you go.
Just kidding.
It's funny though. I do notice like a lot of universities started boot camps themselves because it's a good way to make money. And they're like 20 grand. They tend to be a lot more expensive. They're like 20, 30,000, I think.
Yeah.
As opposed to some of the others that you can go a little cheaper.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, Joe, we were talking about that the other day because we went to Rutgers University.
That's right.
And right after I think we graduated, Rutgers started a coding boot camp, right?
Well, first of all, I need to point out that I take slight offense to Randall's remark about getting my Rutgers University degree and going straight to work at Starbucks. First of all, it was Trader Joe's. Thank you very much that I went to work.
It
was a little bit higher class than Starbucks.
I was talking from my own experience.
Fair enough. No offense there. So when I went to a boot camp, Rutgers was one of the universities that was just starting to roll out one of their own. It would have been right around end of 2016, beginning of 2017.
Yeah.
If there was a boot camp boom and you were going to pinpoint it, I would say that was sort of the beginning of the up curve there. There wasn't a ton of them yet. There was only a handful of kind of major players, and the universities were starting to put their own out. And I think Rutgers, I requested some information on it. I ended up not actually being able to get in touch with the person that was putting it was brand new. It was still being ideated as far as I know. But I think it was through their sort of, I don't know how they call it, if they call it non-degree or continuing education or some kind of certificate program that they had.
They usually put it through certificate programs because it's not you're not getting a full degree. So it's always something like that on a lower level. Yeah.
It was.
Do you remember how much it was, Joe? Or like what they were trying to charge for that?
Between $10,000 and $20,000. I don't remember exactly.
I looked it up. I looked it up when we went, and it's now like I think around 20 to 30.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a lot to invest in just a certificate. I mean, there's so many different certificates you can get now, and they're pretty much all the same education. But you're gonna say something, Randall.
And considering when coding is literally the only field where 50% plus of the people who work in the industry don't have any university degree, are self-taught.
Yeah. What's funny is I made this comment, or I made a post the other day about 10 like coding myths. And that was one of them, was that you can get a job in software development without a degree. And I got a lot of flack from people. Like there were a couple of people who posted on the post or commented on the post and just got really butthurt about it, like really upset and really just like took it out on me. And I was like, I'm so confused because I was like, I gave them articles. I was like, here's an article of like Netflix, Tesla, Spotify. They all like are open to accepting applicants without a degree, just like proving yourself as a coder, I think is more important.
That's actually the truth though. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it is like it's more important just to prove yourself. And the funny thing is, I think that myth comes from like just people's conditioning to think that you need, paper
So
for everything.
I'm curious, what do you think I know we're sort of getting off the topic of boot camps, but I just think this is a good, I don't know, something that will be helpful for people, right? Is what do you think is a good way to prove yourself as a developer? I want to hear like all of your opinions. So Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's a good way to prove yourself?
This is sort of like the catch-22 that you get stuck in at the end of the boot camp, right? Because the boot camp is easy and fun most of the time. If you're one of the people that sticks with it, you're going to enjoy yourself, and by the end of it, you're going to feel like you are a good developer because that's what you paid for. I remember I used to get like quizzes every like week or something in mine, and I would get like 105 points out of 100, right? And I'm like, I'm a coding genius, right? I was like, I'm going to prove myself great, and it's a safe, relaxed place, and we did whiteboard practice interviews in there, and I would do my whiteboard algorithm, and they'd be like, "Wow, great job, Joe. That's fantastic.
You're hired, Joe."
Meanwhile, it's like FizzBuzz or so, one of the. Not to say that that's not important, but when I got out of that, and I'm sure a lot of people have a similar experience, you feel like you have proved yourself, like, oh, of course I can do this. And I'll be honest, like the first handful of interviews that I went through, I got I don't know what's the best sort of verb to use for this. I want to say eviscerated is sort of what comes to mind. I felt
wrong one.
I felt sort of because again, in the boot camp setting, you're paying to be kind of treated nicely, right? They call it a boot camp, where it's actually kind of funny because in the military, which I also have stories of, it's tough love and what have you. So it's really, I don't know why they call it a boot camp at all, because your hand is held the entire way and you're being told what a great developer you are. And as you should, that's customer service. You paid for that, right?
Yeah.
So coming out of it, that's sort of the thing that hits you very quickly. And you're like, oh my goodness, I have not proved myself, or excuse me, I have not proven myself. See, there's that English degree. I have not proven myself. And it's now you're in the position of, okay, well, not just software, you'll hear this across industries. How can I get experience without being hired to like get the experience? It's the cart and the horse, the chicken, the egg, whatever the word is for it. So
yeah,
I kind of saw that coming a bit towards the end. And so what I started to do, and this wasn't my own idea, somebody gave me this advice. I started trying to work for free as soon as I could. And I started trying to build a portfolio as quickly as I could. So by the time I came out, I would have some projects that were different from the standard things they'll give you in the boot camp, because everybody comes out with a tic-tac-toe calculator or the
to-do list.
Find the to-do list, find a bathroom in New York City with the Google Maps API. I mean, those are all great. It's nice to demonstrate that you've done those, but I started looking for people where it's like, okay, I made a website for somebody who's like a CrossFit coach or something, or my buddy was selling really long story, but I'll make it as short as possible because I think it's relevant. I had a buddy who was getting into telemedicine like 3 years before the pandemic. And so they had a service where it sold memberships to this thing where you could call a doctor and you could get a prescription. And this was before HIMSS and before Roman and all that stuff that kind of blew up. They had this thing, and they were trying to, this will make sense to some people that are listening, but they had a WordPress site and they had a third-party service that they were trying to sell. And they wanted to use the WordPress, the WooCommerce, just to be able to pay through because with WordPress and WooCommerce, that's sort of the gold standard, easy way of like, selling some t-shirts or taking a credit card payment online. Anyway.
Yeah.
Long, but I believe it's relevant. So basically they had a real world problem where it was like, okay, so now when I go on an interview, I can talk about how I connected a third-party API to this front end using, you know, PHP, because that's what's under the hood in WordPress. Now, all of a sudden I had real world things to talk about and not sort of that just fizz buzz that I did on the board.
Yeah.
Was that enough in, you know, 99 case? Well, in 9 cases out of 10, not really. You know, it's a great
But it's a
foundation,
start.
but
Yeah.
just to demonstrate sort of how much work needs to be done to sort of prove oneself if you're going to a boot camp. Because that's the other thing, right? If you are going to a boot camp, you're automatically put in the bucket of somebody who went to a boot camp. And then depending on who's looking on that resume, it could be a recruiter, an HR person that doesn't really care either way, or it could be some kind of, you know, gatekeeper degree holder who's like, oh, boot camp guy, I'm not interviewing him. I'm not saying that happens. I can't.
I mean, I'll
can't
say it. I feel like that. I can't
Yeah.
prove it, but I feel like that is the one benefit to a degree, is just that you can say, I have a degree. So people
Right.
take you a little bit more seriously. But
And so to make my point one sentence, if you are going to go the self-taught route, you have to work exponentially harder to prove yourself versus the person who has the CS degree, because that's all they have to do is show the CS degree.
Agreed.
That's the difference. That was
it's like
about 2
pay to
sentences,
play.
but still.
You either pay
Yeah.
for the degree or you have to do the actual work and make the code.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Danny?
I was going to say too, the other thing that I think got me when we went too was like so many people like didn't understand, I think, within our like cohort of people that were going at the same time, but like it's all self-taught when you do this, when you do a boot camp too. And like,
Yeah.
you know, they made it so you could like cut and paste stuff and all. So many people that were in our same cohort would come every week having done nothing, just copy and pasted, no work done. And it's like, you're setting yourself up so much for failure because you're not putting that time in. But they don't understand. And then you have the people that are running going, yay, good job, good job, good job. And it's like, that's
Like
I think it's so disingenuous because you're just taking their money and not like preparing anybody, or at least
I remember
convincing them how hard it's going to be, you know, like afterwards.
Yeah. I remember we had like somebody in one of our cohorts, and it was a Python, I think it was a Python programming like portion of the course. And our goal was like to create a Python like app or something like that. And then we had to show it off to the entire like cohort, right? This dude comes in with like the most crazy like 3D designed app, and we're like, holy shit, this guy is like crazy good developer. And then like the next day we realized it's just a YouTube
and he went through the app step by step, explaining how he did everything in it.
Yeah, like he explained it like he coded this from scratch, from like binary. Like,
it was funny too because I was trying to use the same. He was using the Kibbe framework with Python, and I was trying to use the same one at the same time. Like, how do you do that so fast? And then I went online and found the entire GitHub thing for it.
Yeah,
and the tutorial.
He literally just like cloned a repo and was like, "Yeah, I made that last night." But that's what a lot of people ended up doing, and I think that's one of the downfalls, I think, of boot camps. And you hit this sort of on the head with, you know, it is sort of like a nurturing environment where they're like, hey, you're doing so great, good job, but they give you a lot of the answers. I mean, ours, I don't know about your boot camp, but like ours consisted of so first of all, ours was virtual, it wasn't in person. I know yours was, Joe. But you know, each week you had a number of assignments, you know, one, like a couple for each day. And I mean like educational assignments, like watching videos, whatever. And then there was like a workshop at the end of the week where you had to complete this like longer coding thing. But for the most part, all of the assignments that we got, including the workshop, the answers were available for you. Like literally they're like, this is, you know, figure it out. And then this is the answer. And what a lot of people ended up doing is they just copied the answer and pasted it. And then they were like, yeah, I got it. You know, and I think you never, like, when it comes down to it, what you get out of even a degree, but more particularly a boot camp, is what you put into it, right? Because, you know, some people, I think the three of us had, and I'm sorry to cut you out of this, Joe, but the three of us who went to that boot camp, we had like a little bit more experience than the average person. I mean, I've been like dabbling in development for like probably 15 years now. And then the boot camp was sort of just to build that solid foundation for myself.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people went into it like completely blindsided. I mean, like there were people in our boot camp, and I'm not trying to call out people, but like the reality is it's true. There were people in our boot camp who like one finger typed, right? So they're like on a keyboard like this. It's like you got to be able to type pretty well to be a developer, right? So I think being at this sort of level of like, okay, I generally understand computers and like can use computers well gives you a huge advantage over other people. Go ahead, Danny.
No, I'd also say too, I think we also approached it very differently because the three of us did it together. We met every
Yeah.
week. We were also on our own doing a ton of work during it. That's like all I did during that time. And I know you guys did
Yeah.
the same thing. And like when you looked at us and compared to everybody else, they were not doing that. And yeah, that's true. You're right. Like it's the same as any, same as college. Like what you put in is what you're gonna get out. So like, but
I think
I don't think they prepared people for the amount of like self-motivated work that was necessary.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, is I noticed that particularly because we did an online boot camp, a lot of them sort of have this networking, like we had, I think, a Slack or Discord server, and it sounds great, but it doesn't really, like I never got any benefit out of it because you know, the people, like most people are just posting like memes or nothing really worthwhile on there, right? Like, and if you ask a question on there, like nobody responds, or you get some like asshole response, somebody who's like, oh, you don't know what, you know, the input type is for that, like some dumb shit. And you're like,
Have you
okay,
tried
but
reading the documentation?
yeah, like, you know, so it's not helpful. But I think if there was a better sort of network of, hey, we share code, we have, you know, even having like more open coding sessions available, like things like that would have helped a lot more in my opinion. But just having a Discord server doesn't really do anything, especially if there's not anybody sort of engaging people and moderating that kind of stuff. What do you guys think? You have go ahead, Randall?
So I just wanted to like echo what Joe was saying earlier. We're actually having practical, like a portfolio, unique projects to yourself is certainly very helpful. Because for instance, I actually, when I finished undergrad, I got a degree as a programmer kind of based on my degree. And back then I was a satellite programmer and I literally could not code to save my life. But it was because I had a degree and they needed somebody to fill a seat. It was a government job. I was guaranteed that job for life. So like that's what it was. But then, you know, I learned coding on my own and building up the practical things, the portfolio, the things unique to myself and the practical skills. Now I'm at a spot where when I talk with somebody, they're like, well, what can you actually do? And I say, oh, this, and this. And they're like, oh, you're hired.
Yeah. And I think that's when it comes down to
it. Go ahead, Dan. Oh, sorry. Just like real projects too, give you real problems to solve. And you then overcome real problems rather than these like, you know, like put together assignments that are really like, you know, walking you through everything where you don't solve anything. You don't even know how to explain it because you can solve it. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. That's actually, I mean, that's one of the things that I did when I came out of the boot camp was, and I think this might be helpful for people. So I was like thinking of projects to do because I wanted to, you know, like I didn't want to do the same, like Joe said, like tic-tac-toe and to-do lists. Like every recruiter's seen a million of those on everyone's application. And it's like, doesn't really prove too much. Like you prove that you can do the very basics.
You can follow a tutorial.
Turtle.
What's that?
Turtle. That's why you created Turtle.
Yeah.
I created Turtle. Game. Yeah, I know. I created a Wordle clone, like a shitty Wordle clone, and I called it Turtle.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. It was like a Python command line Wordle.
I still have mine. Every so often I go back into my final project and I'll upgrade the dependencies, make sure it's still
That's
on.
Awesome.
I want to check
but what I actually did, what I actually did was I was thinking of something that would be helpful for me, right? And thinking of some of the pain or problems that I had. And one of them was I fucking hate writing cover letters. Like I hate writing cover letters. That's the least favorite thing of mine in the world. And when you're applying for jobs, you have to write a ton of cover letters and they have to be like customized and whatever. And so I was like, why don't I just make an app that writes cover letters for me? So I took the ChatGPT AI or API, and basically made an app where all you do is you put in a resume, you put in the job description that you're applying for, and it writes you a custom cover letter in like 10 seconds, right? Every time I show that to any employer, they're like, wow, it blows their mind because there's so many different aspects of that. And it's not really anything complicated. Like I'm just using a basic API, input forms, but it just looks good and people see practical use for it and how you took a problem and found a solution for it. And that's, I think, what every employer really wants. They want somebody who's like, okay, I may not know every piece of code under the sun, right? And ultimately, as a developer, you don't need to. Most developers look up everything all the time, right? But you do need to know how to problem solve and like solve puzzles and get to a solution. And so I think from the bootcamp perspective, that's the best thing that you can really gain from a bootcamp. Like they're going to teach you a million different things about every coding language under the sun, but they're only going to teach you like 5 to 10% of that language, right? So
Not even. Like, really?
Not even, right? Like the very core basics, but you're never going to build anything that's valuable. Or, I mean, when we did our boot camp, I was like blown away by how shitty the website looked that we actually built. Like it was like the ugliest website I've ever built in my life. And that was like I was like, wow, this is what you're using in the boot camp. I mean, so besides the point, like you're going to learn a ton about different topics, but be good at none of them, right? So you get out of the boot camp, you're like, awesome, I know Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React,
Cloud,
Native, SQL, AWS, Azure, like all these different things. But you're like, if somebody asked me to like spin up an AWS like server or something like that, I'd be like, I don't even know where to fucking start, you know?
I will say like that's the one thing I found valuable about it was that just the introduction to so many things that it helped me figure out what I wanted to do. Because that is hard because there's so many freaking technologies rolled out all the time. It's like impossible to stay on top of it, it feels like. So that was helpful. But other than that, it was like, I felt so like it was so lacking in so many areas to like,
What do you guys feel about this? I'm curious about your opinion. So me personally, I think that learning web development is like the best first step for most people. I know like a lot of people are interested in like AI and, blockchain or VR, altered reality, like all these different like aspects of software development. But I feel like web development, at least for me, is the best like first step to get there because it teaches you sort of the core of like computers and the internet. Do you guys feel the same way? Do you have like a different path that you would take for most people, or what do you think?
I would agree because I think like right now too with APIs, you can build almost anything anyway through a browser. I mean, and being able to understand front end, back end, being able to make something full stack gives you the power to make full web apps and everything. So I think it's a great place to start. And at the end of the day, once you get into it, all coding languages are fundamentally the same. They're doing the same thing. So it's like you just really, once you start to understand any one, you're able to understand others, I think, fairly easily. That is helpful. I found that later.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone else want to give an opinion on that?
I had a personal bias towards it from the beginning where it was, I mean, first of all, everybody takes a calculated risk when they decide to bring it back to the subject at hand here.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go to a boot camp or not, and if you do, are you going to specialize it in web development? So going to a boot camp in general is a calculated risk that everybody takes based on, can you afford it, literally, can you afford the money, and can you afford the time? Are you going to take yourself out of the workforce, or are you going to work and try to go at the same time? So that's going to a boot camp in general, which I'd like to ask you guys at some point what each of your sort of calculated risks were going into it and why you thought it was going to be worth it for you given those calculated risks. Now, as far as I made that decision for whatever reason that I did, but deciding for it to be web development, I wasn't thinking about, is web development the best way to get into coding and programming if we're going to create a big world of coding and programming. I was drawn to web development because that was my first exposure to it as a kid, and that's what I had always been interested in. And that was really apparent, like who kind of was going into it, where you could tell this used to be a hobby of theirs. And I remember, the 90s making like HTML pages with my dad.
Yeah.
You know, I remember like being a kid and saying like, this is my dog. He like I had like a little blog when I was like a little 10-year-old, right? And I would make like the little HTML tags. I think it was like GeoCities and an Angel
Yeah.
Fire back in the day.
Oh man, yeah.
And then I had like that
Geocities are
sort of
crazy.
that never left me. I'm 30, I'm 33 now. So like I kind of fell out of that once I got into like junior high school, and I, focused my attention on whatever I was focusing my attention on at that time. But I'll tell you, when social media came back out, do you gentlemen remember MySpace
Oh yeah.
didn't have a proper like UI or excuse me, it didn't have an interface for like a whole bunch of basic stuff. You couldn't upload pictures to certain places. You couldn't you couldn't edit your friends list. Everything was very, very limited. Your friends, what was it? The top 8, right? There was anyway. My point is, what people found out was you could paste raw HTML strings. And do you guys remember doing that?
Yeah. I remember there was a guy who actually got arrested because he wrote some code where anytime that like basically it was like a ongoing chain where like somebody he friended would like automatically all their friends would friend him.
It was
So
Dane Cook.
He became like the most popular person on MySpace in like 24 hours because he went from like 0 to like 10 million friends by just injecting code.
It was amazing. It was the Wild West, and there's I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but there's a video somewhere of Mark Zuckerberg explaining the stack of Facebook like a year or two after that. He's giving a presentation to like a Harvard CS class like a year or two after he graduated. It's really cool. But yeah, at the time you could just put these snippets HTML directly into MySpace and it would work. And that was I had done it when I was a kid, but when I did it that time, I remember, bracket IMG SRC equals, and I think it was a picture of like Green Day or like My Chemical Romance or something, and that was I held on to sort of that memory.
Admitting to hacking right now, just so you know.
What's the statute of limitations on that?
I don't know.
8
probably
years.
No, there was. Listen. It was my own website. Yeah, allegedly. But yeah, we used to do that, and that was what I was thinking of when I was looking at boot camps. And I was like, all right, I could learn, servers, or there was like they didn't break it into front end, back end. They broke it into web development, and then I believe there was like data science or like machine learning, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't have a laboratory, but I have blogs. Like I like blogs, and I thought back to coding with my dad, and I thought back to my MySpace page, and I realized that by getting into it and learning more about it, like actually finding out, how does the internet work? Like what is the file transfer protocol, right? Like what the heck is really going on here? And then, down the road to web security and things, just that sort of convinced me by the end of it that, yes, this is the most important, the coolest, most relevant, in my biased opinion, area of programming that one could go into. I grew up on the internet. I was, that's always been my thing. And I love, even now, working in marketing and coding adjacent, the marketing of software. I just I can't imagine myself not having the internet sort of in my life. It's the nerdiest, weirdest thing I've ever said. But for that reason, I do think web development is like a core skill that everyone should possess. I'm an evangelist, if we could still say that.
Do you guys remember a time? I thought of this a few weeks ago. Do you remember a time when you couldn't like use an application on a website? Like you had to go to CompUSA and buy a box that had software in it. Like, dude, isn't that mind blowing? That like I thought about that the other day. I was like, holy shit! Like back then developers had to write code and then they just release it. And it's like, you can't update it. You can't edit it. It just is what it is until the next year when you create a new version of it.
But that's the thing with the APIs and stuff, and the browsers have gotten so powerful. Like, so much
Yeah.
is done through it now. It's like that
And like
wasn't
the
before.
mobile
Like,
devices and
dude.
stuff. That's why I think it's a great first step, right? Because we don't
Yeah.
like very rarely do I actually download software onto my computer anymore. I think the last thing I downloaded like onto my computer was like the Spotify app or something like that, you know? But
Yeah.
most apps now are just web apps, like they exist on a browser. So
Yeah, I agree that web development is important, but I would also like to say that, I mean, you can tell from listening to all of us that we've been messing around with technology for a long time. And
yeah,
I've met a lot of people who basically get overwhelmed because there's all these different areas. They're like, I want to be a developer, but there's like databases, and there's front end, and there's back end, and there's web development, and there's cybersecurity, and there's AI, and there's this language and that language and that language and this, and they never get started. And so
yeah,
like, I think that, you know, web development is great because it pretty much connects to everything. Like, no matter what you end up doing, you will use some stuff that you've learned from web development. But if it's going to be a barrier to entry, just do whatever shiny object you think is cool right now, and then
yeah.
eventually you'll find your next step.
Yeah. So I want to wrap this up because we've done like 30 minutes already. And I think that was super helpful for a lot of people. If you guys do feel like you have other questions about boot camps, just throw them in the comments under this video and we'll answer them for you. Like, not right now, obviously, but later on. But yeah, so is there anything else that you guys want to say in terms of boot camps? I mean, my experience was overall generally good for a boot camp. I know maybe we can end with this, like, and we'll just do it briefly. So my position before a boot camp, my sort of like, I think Joe said this, like my risk profile or something before boot camp was, I was in a, good place financially to like take time to do a boot camp. And so, I don't think our boot camp was like 15 grand. I think it was closer to maybe 10 grand or something like that. But, I already knew a little bit about technology, or a lot, I guess. So I think that's something to sort of like, do you feel like you have a good grasp on technology as a whole? I think that's like something that's sort of important going into a boot camp. And then, being able to dedicate time to it and being really committed to it, I think are the most important things. Because I really wanted to learn software development. I mean, I already did for the most part, but, I wanted that foundation. So yeah, so to me, that was sort of my like risk, was like, I have time and money to sort of, carry myself for the time of this boot camp. I was still working at the time, but it was super helpful to just, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Randall?
Yeah, I had nothing to lose by doing it because I knew I was going to keep on doing it. So I had the philosophy that it's just going to take me as long as it takes. So like
Yeah.
boot camp, they
That's
sell the
true.
boot camps because they tell you, oh, it's going to be this long, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and then you're going to get a job. And that's how they sell it
Yeah.
to you. But like,
Yeah.
I knew from a fact that wasn't going to be happen because I've been developing on my own for a while before the boot camp. But
Yeah.
I knew I had nothing to lose from doing it and a lot to gain. And so I just wanted to get in and do it because I read this thing a long time ago, like become a programmer in 10 years. Everybody wants to become a programmer in 24 hours, which is
Yeah.
impossible. But in 10 years, 100% possible, you can become a phenomenal developer. And
Yeah.
so I just had the philosophy, okay, 10 years. Well, this is just kind of the next step. I'll do this,
Yeah.
then go from there.
I think that's a really good point. Like, if you're considering going into a boot camp, don't look at the boot camp as I go in and then on that backside of that, I'm just a software developer and I can like go work at Google for the rest of my life. The reality is that's your first stepping stone, right? Any education that you do, whether it's self-taught, a boot camp, or a degree, like even a degree, right? That's your stepping stone. You're not a developer, like you're not Mark Zuckerberg after going to university, right? But you are good and you get better every time that you type on a keyboard and make code, right? And that's, I think, the biggest thing for people to understand is that what makes you a developer is developing. It's not a boot camp. It's not a university degree. It's literally what makes you a developer is being in front of a computer and building stuff that you are interested in and helps people, solves problems. So look at it from a long-term perspective. Like if you're trying to change careers, you're literally changing careers, right? Like you wouldn't want to become a pharmacist and be like, hey, I'm going to take a pharmacy boot camp and then I'm just a pharmacist. Like you do that for years, right? So see software development the same way. Yeah. So anybody else want to share their sort of, yeah, Danny, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
was just gonna echo that and say, like, I mean, like, I was happy because when we got into it, I looked at it as just a way to get introduced to stuff that I
Yeah.
might not have known or known about because it was new. But other than that, like, I knew it was gonna take a lot of work. And I feel like that's where a lot of people in our cohort were let down because they really believed, like, oh, in 11 months or 10 months or whatever it was, I'm gonna get out of here and boom, I'll be
Yeah.
hired
With
instantly. It's
minimum
like,
work,
that's, yeah.
with minimal
And
effort
it's
too.
like, and like we were doing freelance projects during it, like, and I
Yep.
think that's what people don't realize. Like, that's all I was doing other than
Yeah.
my other job. I mean, it's like, that's it. So yeah, I think echoing that is just important.
Yeah. And there's like very easy ways to build up your portfolio. Like look at the network that you already have, the people around you, and ask them, like, if you could build an app or build a website, what would it be? And then you can build it for them, and a lot of those people will pay you even to do it. Even if you're a brand new developer and say, hey, I'm brand new, I'm trying to get some experience. I'd like to do a website for free. Or maybe if you love it, you pay me a little bit of money. And that's a great way to get some experience under your belt.
Yeah.
Joe, do you have a perspective on that? Like, what was your risk? I mean, I guess you sort of explained it a little bit, but
Yeah, a little bit. So at the time, I knew that I was paying for free information. I kind of looked at it like that. I said,
yeah,
all the
it's
stuff
true.
is sort of available. I'm paying somebody for free information, which you are.
You are.
But there's, so if that's the case, then what am I paying for? And so for me, the first thing that I felt like I was paying for was accountability, discipline. The world is very different now than it was sort of pre the well-known illness that's been going around the past couple of years. But before that, I don't know if you guys remember, but the idea of like a remote class, even in university, was kind of weird. Like taking a remote class was like, I don't know if I have the discipline for that. I need at least in my circle, the average person that I spoke to would say, no, I got to be in the lecture hall. I need to be in this. If it's at home, I'm not going to do it.
Let me interject there for a second, which is funny because most of those people just never attended class either, but continue.
That everyone, and I'm making a sweeping generalization when I say everyone, but a lot of people, it seems, kind of forgot that is what the world was like before. The idea of, and this, I'm not Mr. Return to Office either. I'm not a propagandist for that. But for me, I felt the same way about the boot camp. And I said, look, I have the time, money, and sort of the opportunity to go and sit there in person. I should do that. It's gonna make me accountable. I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna spend 6-8 hours a day, whatever it is, really focused on it. So I said, first of all, I'm paying for that. I'm paying for the accountability of being there. Secondly, I'm paying for, we'll call that the institutional accountability, the community accountability as well. Because I'm like, I'm sure I'm going to make friends. I know I'm going to talk to people because I'm going to a place to do something that I like with other people that are going to do this thing that they also like. I'm going to go nerd out and talk about Angel Fire and GeoCities with a bunch of other 30-year-old guys, right? I'm like, this is going to be great. That's what I was kind of paying for in my mind. Now that said, at the end of it, and this might be like a cool thing to, I don't want to say end on, but the thing is, both are true to an extent. I did like make a couple of friends there, and I did appreciate being able to kind of close the world out a little bit and, focus in that space in that time. But had something like this existed, if I just had some buddies that I could check in with on a regular basis, a couple of mentors, a couple of senpais, if you will, if I had like a group that was either learning or already working that I could kind of check in with, exchange information with, ask questions, and like that turns into a network too. I mean, hey, you know somebody who's hiring, somebody, oh, I need help on this freelance thing. It's like,
Exactly.
I think that to have a community would totally sort of negate the necessity of me paying for any of those things. If the four of us had gotten together right before I went to the boot camp and had a conversation similar to this and said, all right, we're going to meet once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, then I wouldn't have done a boot camp. So
yeah,
that's my thing.
that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's what we did going into the boot camp, and it definitely benefited us so much. I mean, you can just see, I think 90% of the people that we actually went to the boot camp with just went back to doing their old job. Literally none of them are, because they don't have, like, it's great when you're in that environment, but if you don't build the network while you're there and then carry that with you as you exit the boot camp, you're screwed, because then you're just like on your own trying to build a network now with random strangers and you have no connections. So I think that's a great point, Joe. Yeah. Absolutely. So I'd like to just wrap it up. I think that was pretty helpful for people. Is there anything else you guys want to throw in there before we go? All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in again. We'll be back next Saturday for another sort of webinar like this, where we'll discuss things about software. If you want us to talk about something in particular, feel free to drop it in the comments as well. But yeah, thank you, Joe, so much for being here. And I'm sure we'll have you back as a guest because your insight is super helpful. So yeah, big thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
Danny
Thank you for
and
having me.
Randall. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Peace. Take us out of here, Danny.
All right.
With a song. With a song.
Everybody
All right.
hold
Oh,
your
we gotta
hands
stop.
up
What do
all
we